Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Helen. I hope as you hear those words that something kind of resonates as you think about how wisdom impacts you this week. So, as many of you probably read, our dear Kim has resigned, and of course, we're sad about it, but excited for what's next for her. And we're hoping to be able to make an exciting announcement in the next week or so about who will be coming to kind of fill her shoes. I don't know if that's the right word, but who will be coming to kind of help us along in terms of staffing in the coming year. And so we're really excited about that. Sad to be saying goodbye, but also excited for what God has ahead of us. So please feel free to pass it on to those who aren't aware that while things have changed, there's still lots of exciting things ahead. And so we're looking forward. We're looking forward to what God has in store for us. Now, I'm just going to share my screen. And so for those of you who know me well, then you recognize that I really like to plan. So I really want to know what's next. I want to know what's happening. I want to know why it's happening. And I think one of the most nonsensical statements that people can say in my presence is, well, it'll just work out. And I'm like, that is not foolproof. I've never seen that just be like the way things happen. And so with that in mind, you can imagine that Proverbs 16 is a little bit difficult for me to swallow, because peppered throughout the passage is this incessant reminder that for all of your planning and preparation, the outcome is not as easy to determine as one might imagine. And the author begins with these words of wisdom. We can make our own plans, but the Lord gives the right answers. People may be pure in their own eyes, but the Lord examines their motives. Commit your actions to the Lord, and your plans will succeed. Now, it's essential that we come into Proverbs with kind of a clearer understanding of the book and some of the challenges that it presents. So Proverbs can't be looked at kind of how we typically look at other pieces of scripture, because it's really just a bunch of proverbs. So it's bits and pieces of wisdom to guide one's direction and decision making. So they can't be used as literal or foolproof methods to walk through life. Rather, they're an invitation for us to seek out wisdom rather than reaction, wisdom rather than our best guess, wisdom rather than anger, blind following, or random answers. So as I read Proverbs 16, and I was repeatedly reminded that I can't control the game, I knew that it would be easy to simply talk about how to schedule or how to make a great decision. But I wondered if we could see the scriptures from a slightly different perspective. And so I asked myself, what do these words have to say about how I live and interact in the world as a follower of Christ? What can we learn about how to interact with one another? How do we make space in our busyness for the unexpected? Where are we invited to pay attention to the world around us and thus engage with wisdom rather than simply responding with our best laid plans? And so as I read through Proverbs 16, I thought about a lot of other passages to connect to it. And the one that kept coming to mind was Luke 10, the story of the Good Samaritan. Now, Proverbs 16:1 says, we can make our own plans, but the Lord gives the right answer. And immediately, I am reminded that planning and execution are two different topics. If we haven't learned anything else from this season of this pandemic, it's that you can plan, but that doesn't mean that your plans or the outcomes will be as you imagined. For all of our spreadsheets and all of our looking ahead and all of our thoughtful thinking, we cannot determine the end results. So you can have a firm idea about the outcome and do everything to reach the outcome, yet find yourself in a very different space than where you expected to land. In Luke chapter 10, we are introduced to a religious leader who asks a simple question. He says, what must I do to inherit eternal life? Now, essentially, this is the same question that has dominated much of modern Christianity. Which prayer must I pray? How good must I be? How little or how much must I do to be good enough for heaven? And the results of this mindset created a Christianity that is very much based on religiosity and rules rather than a faith that emerges out of an ever deepening, ever growing relationship with Christ. And so our true goal is to be more and more like Christ, thus participating in the establishment of a world that is more and more Christ-like, rather than simply seeing Christianity as a pathway to the desired afterlife. Now, Jesus' response to the religious leader was as revolutionary then as it is today, and he asks a question to which the response is simple. He says, love God and love your neighbors with equal heart, soul, strength, and mind. Love God with the same intentionality that you love your neighbors. Love your neighbors with the same intentionality that you love God. But this is problematic for the listener, and maybe it's problematic for some of us, because he is very good at loving God with the rituals and the practices and the prayers that he has grown up with the things that he has insisted are a part of what it means to follow God. But the notion of loving his neighbor as himself with that same energy and effort that he loves God with is far more difficult. Now, this is most likely because while he expected the love God portion to stand out, the love others portions always seemed secondary and conditional upon who the neighbor was and what the neighbor was like. Does that sound familiar at all to us? His entire understanding of his faith is wrapped up in a mindset that insists the practices of the faith are far more important than putting one's faith into practice. His ideology has already formed his clear-cut answers, yet here is Jesus insisting that for all of his knowledge and his experience and his tradition and his learning, he still doesn't have the full answer. He doesn't have the full picture. There is more to this idea of relating well with God than simply his synagogue attendance, his years of study, and his morality. If he truly loves God, he must truly love his neighbors. And Proverbs 16:1 bursts to life as we consider our own understanding of what it means to be a follower of Jesus. You see, we may have ticked off all of the boxes and made all of the right decisions at all of the right moments. Perhaps we've said the right prayers, yet we may not fully have the right answer. And so wisdom reminds us that while we may have always understood our relationship with God and our relationship with the church in one way, maybe there's more to the answer. Maybe there's more to learn. Perhaps there are parts and pieces that we need to let go of in order to make space to grab hold of that which leads us towards a more right answer. And thus we are invited to cling tightly to Jesus, but to hold everything else loosely so that we can be formed and shaped and molded by what the Spirit insists is what's next. Now, for the religious leader in Luke chapter 10, he was clinging so tightly to religious piety that the notion that his faith should inform his engagement with others was unsettling, uncomfortable, and challenging. Yet Jesus stands in the midst of this young man's certainty, in the midst of his discomfort at newly proposed ideas. And he whispers then and he whispers now. You can make your own plans and you can create your own norms. You can establish your own rights and wrongs, but it is in authentically following me that you gain the right answers. It is in authentically following Christ that we move towards truth. Proverbs 16:2 reminds us that while people may be pure in their own eyes, it is the Lord who examines their motives. And here we are reminded that for all of our planning and all of our attempts at perfect execution, perhaps a deeper focus on who we are and why we respond as we do is far more important. After all, God is less concerned with our outward perfection than he is with our inner shaping and our character formation. The writer of the Proverbs insists that it's not just what we do, but why we do it that truly matters. And the book of James echoes the sentiment when the author declares, faith without works is dead. The religious leader has posed a question: who is my neighbor? To which Jesus responds with a story. And the story has four main characters, but I want to introduce you to the first three. There's a man who's traveling from Jerusalem. Now we can suspect that perhaps he's coming back from worship at the temple. But along the way, he's brutally attacked and he's left for dead on the side of the road. Now things don't look right. It seems that death is imminent. That is until along the way, two churchgoers walk by, a priest and a Levite. That is essentially a pastor and a lay minister, individuals who are committed to worship, who are committed to pious living, who are committed to morality. They would be people who would be considered pillars and examples within their community, and specifically within the religious community. But as they come across the man who is clinging to life, they take their holy attitudes and understandings and they cross over to the other side of the street. They leave the man for dead, unsure if anyone else will come. And in that moment, they are far more concerned about their safety, their convenience, their religious status, than the well-being of the stranger. And so while their titles, their works, and their beliefs are tied to understanding God, their response is contrary to that of God himself. Rather than offering compassion, care, and concern, they turn their faces away and choose self-interest, self-comfort, and individualism instead. They comfortably shake off the unnerving image of the man who is lying on the ground, and they tell themselves that protecting themselves is far more important than taking a risk on someone else. Their response is far different to the simple command: love God and love others with equal heart, soul, strength, and mind. And wisdom asks a question: how often have I been pure in my own eyes, while my motives and actions look so unlike Christ? How often have I forfeited love for personal comfort? How often have I been the priest and the Levite who simply crossed the road rather than listening, making simple eye contact, remembering that they too are human, offering grace, giving time and energy, or simply having the courage to stand with the battered and the marginalized and the misplaced? Proverbs 16:3 continues, and it seems to offer us a better way. It offers us this tiny bit of wisdom. Rather than relying solely on your preconceived notions or your preconceived goodness, he says, try this instead. Commit your actions to the Lord and your plans will succeed. Now, it seems too good to be true, and it is, if we insist that it is our plans that must prevail, then suddenly these words fall flat. Rather than leaning into the unique invitation to be led by the Spirit. And when we come back to Luke chapter 10, we meet this final character, the Samaritan. Now, the Samaritan is likened to the misunderstood cousin of the Jewish family. So the Samaritans worshiped God a bit differently. They understood their shared history through a different lens. And this led to enmity between what should have been brothers and friends. But it is this despised enemy, the one who most would classify as unholy, as morally compromised, as one who has slanted ethics and religious practices, that bears witness to the pain and suffering of another and refuses to simply walk by. He stops and he risks his own safety, his own religious standing, his comfort, and his schedule, and even ends up using a good share of his money to ensure the man is safe, cared for, and well on his way towards health. His plan is abruptly interrupted, yet he is compelled by his faith and his humanity to ensure that the man who is near death is given the opportunity to experience healing, wholeness, and love. The Samaritan is far less concerned with piety that leads to more piety, but is convinced that his piety and his humanity must be reflected in how he offers mercy and how he cares for the other. And so while helping the man was not on his agenda, nor was it in his best interest, he holds both his religious views and his personal schedule so loosely that he has the opportunity to respond with love and kindness rather than selfishness and self-interest. And it is here that Jesus gives us a beautiful example of what it looks like to love God and love others with equal heart, soul, strength, and mind. And Jesus concludes the conversation by asking this question: who was a neighbor? The answer is clear. It's the man who took time to tend to the wounds of the broken and beaten and suffering man. Author Reggie Williams notes that Jesus moves away from the notion of the original question, which is, who is my neighbor? And he exchanges it for a statement that says, you are called to be a neighbor. And so wisdom beckons us to approach how we view God and others with an openness to shift and change our focus in the direction that God is leading, rather than simply in the direction that we have always walked in. Wisdom beckons us to love others with more than words, but also with our actions. Wisdom beckons us to be both aware of the Spirit and open to the Spirit, changing our direction so that at all times and in all seasons we are ready to both receive and offer deep, Christ-like love at all times and in all situations. When we become fully open to the Spirit's guidance, my goals and plans shift to align with His own. Interruptions can become holy invitations. A change in plans or a change in pace can be a Spirit-led intervention. And the people who surround us become those that we are called to be a neighbor to and with. So when we lean into the wisdom that we don't control the board, nor was that ever our intended calling or our purpose, we can become more and more open to being a neighbor to those around us. And that means we become more and more open to following the way of Jesus and offering love when it's easy and when it's difficult, allowing our faith to transform how we respond to the world, and becoming ever more convinced that our role as the church and as Christ followers is less about our acts of piety and much more about our acts of love. And so my prayer is that we lean into this piece of wisdom as a way of life. That we can make our own plans, but the Lord determines our steps. So may we listen and may we follow. May we love and may we be a people who above all else are led by the Spirit that is love itself. So we're going to go into our breakout rooms and we're going to look at these questions. And I encourage you that if you have a little bit of time, just to spend some time in prayer with one another as well. And so the first question is, are you a planner? How do you respond when your plans change or fall apart? Which part of the Good Samaritan story do you connect with the most? Was it the priest and the Levites? Was it the man who was beaten and left on the side? Is it the Samaritan? And what does it mean in your own words to be led by the Spirit? And how is this different than being led by self or by others? So I'll let Kim lead us from here.